Welcome to the final installment of our series of modules on Marzano's 9 essential strategies for effective instruction. This module is on the final 3 strategies, all of which are designed to help students extend and apply knowledge. The first strategy is homework and practice. Practice involves giving students opportunities to develop proficiency with new skills and processes. Homework describes any opportunity that students are given to learn or review content and skills outside of the school day. So one way to think of homework is as additional practice that students complete outside of school. Before we go any further, think back to your own days as a middle or high school student. Were you ever given a homework assignment that you did not know how to complete? Were you ever given a homework assignment that wasn't connected to what you learned in class that day? Did you ever have a teacher who gave out homework assignments as a punishment? Did you ever have a teacher who took a strange amount of pride in the amount of homework he or she gave? If so, it's possible that you had teachers who were operating under some common misconceptions associated with homework. To begin with, the purpose of homework is to provide practice that students can use to increase speed, accuracy, fluency, or conceptual understanding. Homework should give students the opportunity to practice a skill so that it becomes more ingrained and automatic, or it should help students to deepen their understandings of concepts they learned about in class. Homework should never be given as a replacement for instruction, and it should never be given on skills or processes that students are not yet able to perform independently. Homework should also never be given as a punishment. At some point, we've all probably heard teachers make threats about homework like, "The next time I hear someone call out, the whole class will have to do 10 extra problems." This is counterproductive and can damage a teacher's relationships with his or her students. Last of all, be careful not to confuse time spent on homework with the level of rigor in your classroom. Giving lots of homework doesn't automatically mean that you have a challenging class. It could just mean that you're assigning lots of busy work. In general, the amount of time students spend on homework is far less important than the quality of the homework assignment itself. So what are some best practices concerning the use of homework in class? First, homework should be aligned to the objective that was studied in class that day. Second, teachers should ask themselves, what learning will result from this homework assignment? When teachers give homework, they should explain the purpose and the rationale behind it. Third, the teacher should check to ensure that students are able to perform the required tasks of the assignment independently. Homework has little value if students cannot complete it on their own. Fourth, feedback should be provided on all homework assignments. In fact, it is far more productive to give feedback on homework assignments than grades. If you're finding that you do not have time to give students feedback on all of their homework assignments, you should either reconsider how that feedback is being provided and teach students how to give one another feedback on homework, for example, or you should reconsider how much homework is being assigned. Fifth, giving the same homework assignment to all students is not always productive. Students might need different amounts of practice with the same concept, or the same amount of practice with different concepts. Finally, using class time to check homework has been found to either be uncorrelated or negatively correlated with student achievement. Before we move on to the next strategy, here are a few final thoughts about practice in general. Teachers should clearly identify when students are going to practice and explicitly communicate the purpose behind the practice. Students are much more likely to remain engaged if they understand the purpose behind the practice, as well as what they are expected to do as a result of it. Next, students need to be given instruction and practice with conceptual understandings before they begin practicing independently. For example, If a student is being asked to solve a series of math problems that involve subtracting fractions with unlike denominators, they first need to understand why it is necessary to find a common denominator before subtracting. Last of all, formative practice should not be graded. Students should be given feedback, not grades, when they are engaged in practice designed to build understandings. The second to last of Marzano's 9 strategies is identifying similarities and differences. This is a powerful strategy that leads students to higher levels of thinking and conceptual understanding. Identifying similarities and differences helps us to make sense of the world around us and leads us to ask important questions like, why is this like that? There are 4 sub-strategies associated with identifying similarities and differences. The first is comparing and contrasting, analyzing how things are alike and different. The second is classifying, organizing things into groups. The third is creating metaphors, identifying the same general pattern in 2 different topics. And the fourth is creating analogies, identifying relationships between pairs of concepts. When using these strategies, there are a few important things to keep in mind. Before asking students to engage in any of these activities, they must first be preceded by teacher modeling. This could be done with such tools as sentence starters or graphic organizers. Also, these strategies are most powerful when they are connected to student background knowledge. Sometimes when teaching these sub-strategies, it's helpful to create a process or rule for students to follow and then model that process. For example, when teaching comparing and contrasting, the teacher could model and then ask students to practice a process like this. First, select the items to compare. Let's say that we're comparing 2 systems of government, democracy and oligarchy. The next step would be to identify which characteristics of the 2 items we want to base the comparison on. In this example, I could have students compare based on characteristics like which group has the most political power, or degree of public participation in government. Last of all, we would ask students to explain how the 2 things are similar or different based on those characteristics. For classifying, I could teach a process like this. First, identify the items that you want to classify. Let's say that I'm trying to sort polygons into different categories. Next, select an item, identify its key attributes, and then identify other items with those same attributes. I want to identify different polygons that all have 4 sides. This can include shapes like rectangles, squares, parallelograms, trapezoids, and so on. Now we can create a category based on the attribute that items must have for membership. My category could be called quadrilaterals. From here, I could combine categories or split into smaller categories. For example, now I'm looking for shapes with 4 sides that also contain 4 right angles. Metaphors and analogies are tougher because they require higher levels of thinking, but teachers could still model a process. Let's look at metaphors. We use metaphors to understand how 2 items are similar on an abstract level. We could teach students a process like this. First, identify the most basic or important elements of a situation. Let's say that I'm teaching students about the concept of a cell. I want them to understand that different organelles in a cell have different jobs within the cell. For example, the nucleus controls all of the activity in a cell. The ribosomes build proteins. The endoplasmic reticulum is where the ribosomes do their work, and so on. Second, we can write the basic information as a general pattern by replacing words for specific things with words for more general things. A cell contains different parts that do different things. There's a boss that controls all the activity, workers that have specific jobs, and a workspace where they make things. Lastly, I would try to find a different situation to which this same pattern applies. A cell is like a factory. The nucleus is the CEO. The ribosomes are the workers, and the endoplasmic reticulum is the assembly line. Finally, we come to analogies. Analogies show relationships between relationships. In order to be an effective instructional tool, at least one pair of relationships in the analogy needs to be familiar. Some steps might look like this. First, identify how the two items in the first pair of things is related. Let's say that I'm looking at the role of parentheses in the order of operations. Parentheses is the first thing that I do when I'm using the order of operations. Next, I state the relationship. Solving what's inside parentheses is the first step in the order of operations. Last, I need to identify another pair of things that has a similar relationship. Well, I could think about driving. Turning the key in the ignition is the first thing I do to start driving, just like solving what's inside parentheses is the first thing I do in the order of operations. A good instructional strategy is to provide a complete analogy and ask students to explain the relationships. For example, I could present this analogy and ask students to explain it. You could also present an analogy that's missing an item and ask students to supply it. For example, when using the strategy of identifying similarities and differences, always make sure to select the strategy that fits the learning experience. For example, you might use metaphors and analogies when you want students to understand abstract ideas and make connections between new and prior knowledge. No matter what, remember to model the strategy prior to having students engage in the practice. Last of all, one important point of clarification. We use the identifying similarities and differences strategies to teach academic objectives. They are not an end in themselves. For example, my end goal is not for students to compare and contrast. It is to better understand two things through comparing and contrasting. The final Marzano strategy is generating and testing hypotheses. Really, this involves teaching students to ask the question, what if, to make an educated guess about the answer to that question, and then to test it out. Generating and testing hypotheses requires students to analyze and evaluate, and to think deeply about the causes behind and relationships among different phenomena. It's important to note that generating and testing hypotheses is not just a science thing. It can be done in all content areas and is a powerful tool for student engagement. One way that teachers can have students generate and test hypotheses is by engaging them in a process of problem solving. Problem solving might follow a pattern like this. First, identify a goal. Second, describe barriers or constraints to achieving that goal. Third, identify different solutions and hypothesize which one will work. Fourth, try out the solution. And fifth, explain whether the hypothesis was correct. This process could be followed in traditional ways, like solving math problems or science experiments, but could also be applied to other content areas as well. For example, a language arts teacher can engage students in this process with goals like reducing the total number of grammar and spelling errors in writing assignments, or improving the quality of references used in research. Students can be given ownership of the problem-solving approach and apply it to problems that matter to them, like reducing the number of students who drop out of high school, or improving relationships between students and faculty. Teachers can also engage students in investigations. Investigations involve identifying or resolving issues regarding past events for which there are confusions or contradictions. Students might follow a process like this. Identify the situation, identify what is known or agreed upon about the situation, offer a hypothetical scenario based on what you understand and know, and analyze evidence to determine if that hypothetical scenario is plausible. Examples of questions that prompt investigations could be things like, could the cleanup of the oil spill off the Gulf Coast have been handled differently? Or, was it necessary to drop the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the conclusion of World War II? The big idea behind having students generating and testing hypotheses is to move them away from right answer learning, where students are rewarded for arriving at a single predetermined answer. When engaging in this strategy, there are some best practices to remember. First, teachers need to model how to generate and test hypotheses. Second, students need resources to engage in this strategy. This might include graphic organizers that help them to organize their thinking. It could also include the teacher pointing them in the direction of resources that provide evidence that could help them establish and test out hypotheses. Third, teachers could provide templates that students could use to report their work, as well as sentence frames they could use to articulate explanations. Last of all, teachers must provide guidance to students during each stage of the process of generating and testing hypotheses. They do this by incorporating other strategies from the Marzano Nine, which include asking strategic questions, providing cues to students on where to focus their attention, and giving timely feedback. Before we end this session, let's once again take a few moments to look at some technology tools that you can use with some of the strategies discussed in this module. For homework and practice, the Khan Academy is a free online resource funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for students, coaches, parents, and teachers. Access the video library containing over 3,600 videos in K-12 math, science, finance, economics, and humanities topics. Interactive challenges and assessments are also available. Screencasting is a great way to record short videos that can be used as tutorials or how-tos that parents and students can refer to during homework time. There are several easy screencasting tools for the computer and the tablet or iPad. Jing is a popular free program that can be used with either a Windows or Mac operating system. Show Me Interactive Whiteboard is a mobile application for the iPad. Several online and mobile apps allow teachers and students to create flashcards that can be used as homework and practice aids. Quizlet.com is just one of the many flashcard websites. You may remember seeing Kidspiration and Inspiration software from the last Marzano video module. These programs can be used to create both simple and high-level graphic organizers. Both programs can create templates for comparing and contrasting or classifying objects and ideas. Several student interactives can also be used to record similarities and differences. Consider the compare and contrast map from readwritethink.org and the shape sorter from Illuminations. Intel has created a tool called the Seeing Reason tool to map out cause and effect relationships to help understand complex problems. They have also developed another interactive tool called the Showing Evidence tool that students can use to create a claim and then support or refute it with appropriate evidence. This concludes our suite of modules on Marzano's 9 essential strategies for effective instruction. We hope that you are now able to perform the 2 objectives set forth at the beginning of these modules. Identify and explain Marzano's 9 categories of strategies for effective instruction, and identify best practices as well as common pitfalls associated with each strategy.